We're 5 days away from the NBA draft, and sometimes to remind yourself how good things could be, you have to look at how bad things have been. On today's episode, the special episode, we're going to talk about the 10 worst draft mistakes by the Chicago Bulls. We're going to talk about all that and more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, there, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. I want to start this off. Well, it's everything we're talking about today. I want to talk about the worst draft mistakes by the Chicago Bulls in today's episode, some of the players that just did not work out for the Bulls. So let's talk about it, right? I want to hear from you guys on this one. Please, if you have any other players, please do not hesitate to put any of that up, but let's go ahead and talk about it. At number 10, I got Marquis Teague here at number 10, who the Bulls did draft in the 2012 draft with the 29th overall pick. He was a first-round pick. His NBA averages end up being 2.4 points per game, 1 rebound, 1.5 assists on 34% shooting from the field. He only played 2 seasons with the Chicago Bulls. Matter of fact, he didn't even make it 2 full seasons with the Chicago Bulls. By the end of his second season, he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets. He then went on to play with the Memphis Grizzlies as well before his career was then over after the 2017-2018 season, after he made a brief comeback then. Marquis Teague was one of the players. Me and Pat from the Windy City Breeze were just talking about Marquis Teague. And after drafting him, when you look at now how many Kentucky guards there are around the NBA, Marquis Teague should have been a guy who, winning a national championship, he was fresh off a national championship. Many people thought that Marquis Teague was a better athlete than his brother Jeff Teague and thought he had more upside and ceiling. But unfortunately, it did not work out for the Chicago Bulls at any chance. What made this worse is that Marquis Teague was here during a lot of the time where Derrick Rose was down. And so people had some hope that he was going to be able to step in and maybe take an opportunity, and it just did not work out. When you look at who the Bulls passed up on, right? Remember, Tom Thibodeau wanted to draft Draymond Green with this pick, and he ended up going later on. They didn't him. Chris Middleton was also a player that was picked after Marquis Teague. Unfortunately, Marquis Teague, one of the worst draft selections by the Chicago Bulls, especially when you look at the fact that it was a first-round pick. Now, we're going to go to another guard next, right? That is Jay Williams. Now, this was not due to any of Jay Williams' fault. He had 1 season in the NBA after being drafted number 2 overall by the Chicago Bulls. And while his rookie season wasn't anything crazy, it did start looking like Jay Williams was going to be a player that had some potential to turn it around. When you look at the last month of the season for Jay Williams, he averaged 13 points per game. He did that on 59% shooting, and he shot the ball 68% from the three-point line, only taking 2, though, per game, 5 assists per game, almost 3 rebounds per game as well, and almost a steal. Jay Williams was a player that looked like in that month of April, he was starting to put it together. Now, I know we have a lot of conversation now about, the after March and what that basketball means, but it did seem like Jay Williams was starting to put things together that he needed to put together, and then he was going to be able to build off of that in year 2. But unfortunately, unluck there with the motorcycle incident, and Jay Williams never got back into the NBA. He did try a brief comeback at one point in time, but it never happened for him, unfortunately. Now he's over doing his sports analyst thing, but it's really unfortunate that, you had this type of mistake as the franchise was trying to move into a new direction. But who knows? If that never happened, maybe we don't draft Kirk Hinrich. Maybe we don't draft Ben Gordon. If Jay Williams ends up working out, it's unfortunate what happened to his career. And again, I don't want to put this all on him. It wasn't via him. It was via a freak accident, and that really does suck when it comes down to it. But from that to one man's trash, and that is Chandler Hutchinson. People may remember that Chandler Hutchinson is such a fail by the Chicago Bulls on draft day, mainly because they gave him a promise well ahead of the draft. They ended up picking him in round 1 at pick number 22. He only averaged 5.4 points per game in his NBA career, and he played 3 seasons with the Chicago Bulls, 2 full seasons. By that 3rd season, he only played 7 games before he was traded to the Washington Wizards, and he never really amounted to anything in the NBA. I think he's still somewhere playing, maybe overseas, something like that. But Chandler Hutchinson being a first round pick in 2018, while there was some thought that Chandler Hutchinson as a wing player, as a defender, had that 3-and-D potential there, he never really turned into anything, unfortunately. The opportunities that he had there just did not work. He had a bone injury in his foot as well that threw off that when it came down to it. He retired at 26 years old. Did Chandler Hutchinson. And so I think most people are going to agree that Chandler Hutchinson was definitely a fail by the Chicago Bulls on draft day. Next up, Eddy Curry. Now, Eddy Curry is a weird one to judge, right? Number 4 overall pick by the Chicago Bulls. He ends up staying 4 seasons with the Bulls. And, he was a hope, baby Shaq, right? He was going to turn into something special when we drafted him in 2021. We thought we were going to build a twin tower type lineup with him and Tyson Chandler. That never really worked out for him. And Eddy Curry was just a player that never really acclimated to the league to really have his poor dietary needs, all that type of stuff. It just did not work out. Now, he did have some successful seasons in the league. When you look at what he was able to do, almost a 20-10 season that he averaged in New York at one point in time, more like 20-8. And it looked like maybe there was still something to salvage there. But after that point, that season where he averaged the most points per game, he played 81 games that season, averaged 19 points per game. He followed it up with only 58 games played the following season. And after that, he only played a total of like 25 games after that before his last season in 2012, 2013. And unfortunately, Eddy Curry never really worked out, was not worth the fourth overall pick. And it just did not end up working out for him at all, unfortunately, when it came to Eddy Curry. But I think most people is that, the Shaq comparisons is one of the reasons the Bulls drafted him, and it never really worked out for him, unfortunately. The next guy, and this is a deep pull if people remember this, this is Dalibor Baric, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And this is a guy that the Bulls picked in the first round at number 24. And this is where there was a lot of boom in international players in the NBA. And, they had hoped that they were going to be a guy that got the next international center. He was from Croatia. And unfortunately, despite some stints in the G League, he never really turned into anything, right? His biggest highlight is getting dunked on. And so that is the problem when it comes down to this. When you look at him, the physical makeup that you like to look at, he had really big size, and you thought some footwork there, but he averaged 2.6 points per game over the course of his NBA career and 36% shooting. As a big man, that's just, you can't do that. You end up only playing 95 games over 3 years for the Chicago Bulls before not being in the league at all. Definitely one of the biggest mistakes by the Chicago Bulls as well. Next up at number 5, Marquis Fizer. Now, for those that watch Locked on Bulls with me and Pat, the designer, that Marquis Fizer is a trigger for Pat, the designer. A 4th overall pick by the Chicago Bulls, 9.6 points per game over his NBA career. He did have 2 seasons of double-digit scoring with the Bulls. In his second year, 2001 to 2002, he averaged 12.3 points per game. He did that on 43% shooting. The next year, 11.7 points per game, and he did that on 46% shooting from the field. So, okay there, right? Nothing that screams of number 4 overall pick, which apparently the Bulls have problems with number 4 overall picks. He ended up playing 4 years in Chicago before going on to Milwaukee. And at that point in time, he played 1 season after that. In 2005, 2006 was his last year. And unfortunately, Marquis Fizer just never really amounted to anything in the NBA. This was another one of those post-Jordan moves where the Bulls thought they were going to get somebody. He tore his ACL before even playing a game for the Chicago Bulls, I believe. And so, it never really worked. He was never the same after that. And unfortunately, and he tore his ACL after a solid season, I believe. And then he was just never the same after that. And that was really when ACL injuries were really the end all be all of a basketball career. The next guy that we're going to talk about is Denzel Valentine. Drafted in 2016 in round 1, picked 14 overall. And Denzel was another one of those guys that you thought you were getting a modern day kind of point forward type player, right? He drew a lot of comparisons to Draymond Green at that time because they both came from Michigan State. That never amounted to anything. Draymond Green, even himself saying after Denzel was drafted, he's the guard version of me. That was an exact quote from Draymond Green. And Denzel never really amounted to anything in his NBA career, averaging 7 points per game for his career. He did have 1 season, his second year here, averaging double-digit points at 10 per game, but it never really turned into anything. Decent 3-point shooter at 36% for his career. His second year, he did take 5 3-pointers per game, hit that at almost 39% clip, almost decent. but it never really turned anything. The defense was never there. The three-point shooting, and overall, he just was a player that he was a head case. The bad decisions that Denzel Valentine had, we can start a highlight reel of just bad decisions that Denzel made on the court, and that ultimately what ended up doing him. 6'4", you really wanted him to be somebody that really brought some firepower either off the bench or whatever for the Chicago Bulls, and it just did not turn out. He ended up not really turning into any type of violation scorer at all. He couldn't score off ball consistently. He was just never good enough to play in the NBA. Next up, Doug McDermott. And this is more so for who they traded. Doug McDermott ended up having a pretty decent NBA career, right? Since he left Chicago, after that, he put together some decent seasons in the NBA, right? But we made an error because we traded Yusuf Nurkic and Gary Harris, the 16th and 19th overall pick, to get him, right? And it's unfortunate. Like, we could have drafted Jokic. We could have drafted that. We could have kept Yusuf Nurkic, right? I think both those players, and Gary Harris and Nurkic, put together some solid NBA seasons and could have been players that the Bulls needed at that. Doug McDermott never lived up to the hype that he had there at being, one of the best scorers in college basketball. That doesn't always translate one for one. And like I said, Doug McDermott, it's not just because of the player who he is. I think if the Bulls would have drafted him, somewhere else that, and kept some other picks, things like that, like there's a world in which Doug McDermott is a solid pick for the Chicago Bulls. But, when you look at what the Bulls gave up to get him and then what his career ended up amounting to, like I said, he put together 3 really good seasons in Indiana and then went on to go have a couple of solid seasons in San Antonio as well after that. But he bounced around the league. He had stints with the Thunder, the Knicks, the Dallas Mavericks, went back to the Indiana Pacers, but he never really had anything special like the Bulls were hoping for when they drafted him. And I think that that's a huge mistake in how the Bulls gave up a lot of assets for him in that case. But it is what it is there. Doug McDermott, a player that, like I said, put together a solid enough career, but the Bulls trading 16 and 19 to get him at number 11. Man, I don't know about that one. But all right, next up is a guy that I know many people are gonna expect to hear on this list. And no, he's not number 1. I'll explain why, but that's Patrick Williams. 4th overall pick in 2020, the first pick by the new front office in Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley, front office that said they wanted to build organically and through the draft. And while Patrick Williams had some pretty solid moments his rookie year where it looked like, I think after the rookie year, a lot of people thought, okay, Patrick Williams could turn into something, right? But between the role changing in his second year, injury in his second year, I do think he's also a player that put on too much weight, that lost a lot of the kind of mobility and things that made him special trying to move to power forward. Patrick Williams has just not progressed. He's basically the same exact player that he's been. The problem where it comes in at Patrick Williams is when you look at some of the players that were there on the board after Patrick Williams, and that's where some of the biggest issues come in at. Patrick Williams, Tyrese Halliburton's a player that was drafted after P. Will, his own teammate in Devin Vassell, those type of guys. Like, it was a reach to draft Patrick Williams at number 4 overall, and he's still a player that's 23 years old. It really sucks to kind of think that he is who he is, but it's really the mentality when it comes down to P. Will. All the raw skill in the world, but just doesn't seem like he has the desire to put it all together. And that's where the problem stands in for Patrick Williams, and that's where things really do stand out and why Patrick Williams is one of the worst draft selections by the Chicago Bulls of all time. Tyrese Maxey, Tyrese Halliburton, Devin Vassell, and Devin Vassell was on the same team. You had to see him in looking at Patrick Williams. It just all didn't work out. But the number 1 worst draft pick, in my opinion, by the Chicago Bulls and worst draft day mistakes was trading LaMarcus Aldridge for Tyrus Thomas. And especially when you look at it, right? You traded Tyrus Thomas for the athleticism. He had a great NCAA tournament, all that type of stuff. But the one thing that everybody knew was that the Bulls needed a power forward or a center. You had LaMarcus Aldridge there. And while LaMarcus Aldridge's career also got ended early because of injuries and things like that, he had a way better career than what Tyrus Thomas ended up having. And again, another player drafted 4th overall. And it's just, it's unfortunate because the Bulls did this when they didn't have to. You had a player in LaMarcus Aldridge that you drafted and turned around and traded that you could have just held on to and probably would have been a much better player. You look at what LaMarcus Aldridge, no matter how you look at him, averaged 19 and 8 on 49% shooting for his NBA career. And he ended up playing until 2022 was his last year in the league. You compare that to Tyrus Thomas, a player who didn't even average double digits. He did average it 1 year for the Chicago Bulls, but overall for his career, 7.7 points per game. He ended up being out of the league, and even before he was out of the league, he was never an impact player at all. And he was always a player that was always potential. Just did not work out for the Chicago Bulls at all. But I think that this is worse than even P. Will, than even Jay Williams, than even Doug McDermott, because you drafted LaMarcus Aldridge. When people go back and look, they will see that the Bulls drafted LaMarcus Aldridge number 2 overall. You could have just kept LaMarcus Aldridge, and you could have had something there, especially with what the Bulls already had in Kirk Hinrich, in Luol Deng, and Ben Gordon. That could have been a team that you could have built around. Now, who's to say we ever get Derrick Rose if that's the case? But I just think when you look at it in the vacuum, LaMarcus Aldridge, and the fact that the Bulls traded that for Tyrus Thomas, that was the worst draft mistake by the Chicago Bulls ever. But let me know what you guys think on all that down below. Let me know who you guys think is some of the worst draft decisions by the Chicago Bulls of all time. Make sure you're following us at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number 1 spot for everything Bulls related. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Like I like to end every episode on. Love you guys. Go Bulls. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.